people can watch, so I'd like to get it pretty much on time. My name's R.T. West. I'm a master gardener here, and we do presentations like this, volunteer. We are the volunteer force of the University of Maryland Extension. And on the slide up there, you can see our chain of command. Starts with the University of Maryland and works down through the Agriculture and Natural Resources Department of the university. And finally, our big boss is the extension agent here in Calvert County. I want to give a thanks to the library here, who is so generous as to loan us this room on Saturday morning so we can give these presentations. And I'm really glad to see the number of people we have here. I thought with the weather the way it was that a lot of people would cancel out, but I know you gardeners are pretty hardcore. So I really thank you for braving the weather to come out and attend. We're equal access program. We do not discriminate against anybody, and if somebody falls into a category that's not there, let me know and we'll add it. Now, contrary to popular belief, master gardeners don't even have to be gardeners. We are supposed to be outreach specialists. We're supposed to work with the community to educate and discuss items of gardening and horticulture which are bay friendly and water friendly and do not hurt the environment. That is our main job here. Now, there's a lot of master gardeners who are exceptional gardeners, but you don't really have to be. So if you're interested in the program, interested in working with people, we work with everybody and trying to work with a lot of kids to get it started off with the youngsters appreciating their environment. Forgive me, I'm going to be reading a lot of this. First time I've given this presentation, and since it's streaming, I don't want to miss anything. During this presentation, we'll go over the pertinent provisions of the Maryland Fertilizer Law, and you'll learn a couple of ways to determine your soil's condition, what makes fertile soil, plant nutrition, and some ways to fertilize your lawns and gardens safely. That's safely, I say, without hurting your soil, without hurting your environment, without hurting your plants, and keeping the waterways healthy. Now, you have a handout on the table that is from the Maryland Department of Agriculture, and it's the Maryland's new lawn fertilizer law, effective 1 October 2013. Why have a Fertilizer Act? It's to protect the bay and the watershed. Its provisions are not restrictive, they're best management practices, or BMPs. You can't go wrong with following the procedures that they outline in here. It'll make your lawn healthier, it'll make your grass grow better, and on and on. The Maryland Fertilizer Use Act of 2011 spawned the lawn fertilizer law of 2013. The Fertilizer Act was programmed for farmers, for agriculturalists. And then they found out, it used to be agriculture was the biggest polluter of the waters around, but that's changed with the development, with the reduction in agriculture, especially around here, and the increase in lawns and home gardens. Now, residents cause about 44% of the pollution in the state here. And the main high points I'm going to go over real quick is just follow the University of Maryland fertilizer recommendations. And it also requires limited phosphorus applications. They've determined that phosphorus is one of the nutrients. Number one, it's persistent. Number two, it causes growth in the waterways, which you don't want. And third, fertilizer may not be used as a de-icer. The fertilizer that is mostly used for a de-icer is urea. And urea is about 35% nitrogen. It's a salt. You put it on those sidewalks. It melts the ice, does a great job, but then it runs off. And especially in the winter, when you use it, the ground's frozen, so it all runs off. Goes into the waterways, goes into the bay. Do not let fertilizer land on impervious surfaces, for example, sidewalks, driveways, or streets. And that's just common sense. Don't be messy about it when you're using the fertilizer. You put it on your lawn. If it gets on the sidewalk or the driveway, sweep it back into the lawn. Don't apply fertilizer when heavy rain is predicted, and don't fertilize between November 15th and March 1st. Now, why would they come up with those dates? Well, number one, the plants start shutting down. The plants don't really grow that much in the winter, so they're not going to use the fertilizer you put down. What's going to happen to it? It's going to sit there until you get a big rain, until you get a big snow melt, and it's going right into the waterways. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time to put it down during those periods. And use limited amounts of time release fertilizer. You get a lot of advertising that says, use the time release stuff, use the time release stuff. Well, it can be good in a way, but you really have to watch your application of it. Now, the fertilizers, which we recommend using, are covered with polymers. So it gradually melts, and then the fertilizer escapes, fertilizer gets on your plants. But it also, if you put it down in the fall, then, which they say, fertilize your lawns in the fall sometime, it does not get to the plants. It sits there. Winter comes along, it's still in that polymer. The rains come, the snow melt comes, washes right into the bay. Okay. Moving along. Now, these restrictions do not apply to vegetable gardens, but the same reasoning applies and should be used when you're raising crops or vegetables or ornamentals in your lawn. And if you have a farm, you're subject to other provisions of the Fertilizer Use Act. I follow the lawn fertilizer provisions for vegetable gardening. They just make sense. It's a smart thing to do, and we're just trying not to get our waters polluted. Now, that's all I have on the Fertilizer Act. I'm going to go into a little bit about soil fertility, because I think that's one of the most important things that we've neglected for centuries now. Let's define fertility. And I found these, they were on the first page when I Googled fertility definition. And one is from dictionaryreference.com. It was the first one up there. And it said the capacity of soil to supply nutrients in proper amounts for plant growth when other factors are favorable. When we talk about other factors, we're going to go into those, because the factors can include the water, soil porosity, biological activity, and pore space, which means the amount of air that's in the soil, structure, texture, which are, structure is defined by how well the soil sticks together, makes clumps, and makes pore spaces. And texture is the actual mineral content of the soil, your sand, your silt, and clays. And the list goes on as to factors that can determine how fertile your soil is. Now, the second one I got, and it's Oxford Dictionaries, and it was right there, and it said the quality of being fertile or productiveness, and then in italics it said improve the soil fertility by adding compost. So I love that. I think that's a great idea. And so we're gonna try to get to know our soil. People don't realize that plants live underground. They don't live, most plants. I'll say, I wouldn't say 1%, but I'd be wrong. I'm going to kick out 90%. 90% of your plants live underground. The only thing they have on top of the ground are their food production parts, and sex organs, and that's all that sticks out of the ground. So, and you'll notice, like right now, all of your deciduous plants have gone underground. There's nothing really living on top. So, first thing you want to do to get to know your turf and garden soil is to just dig a clump of it up and look at it. If it crumbles in your hand, it's going to be pretty good. Does it have anything living in it? Does it break up easily? Are there roots in it? And that's really important. Does it smell fresh? There's a semi-bacteria called Actinomycetes that it breaks down the organic portions of your soil, the leaf litter, the old plants, anything that falls down, old bug carcasses. These little Actinomycetes, which is a cross between a fungus and a bacteria, gives off spores, and you can smell them. And it's what makes a fresh spring rain smell so good, because it's the water drops hitting the soil, it splashes up and knocks these spores up in the air, and it just smells good. And you can smell it when you pick up a handful of good compost or a handful of good soil and smell it. If it smells fresh and sweet, it's probably good. Yeah, and you'll know it if it's gone anaerobic and has all that stinky and ammonias and everything else in it. So smell of it, feel it, you can taste it. Most people don't want to do that, but that's a good indicator. Farmers do it; they just taste it, see if it's bites them or tastes sweet. I don't recommend it. So we're running into one problem that Calvert County soils are described as highly eroded. Everything this side of the floodplain over by the Patuxent, everything, and you can see it. You can see where the little ravines go down and then they level out flat. Well, all the topsoil is washed down into the ravine, and it's just so easy, such a marked line where all your topsoil is on this side of the county. So we're starting behind the power curve right off. Now, this is a great website, by the way, Colorado State Garden Notes. If you go on there, you can learn some really good stuff real fast. I quoted this from: fertilization will not compensate for poor soil preparation, the lack of water, weed competition, other non-nutrient growth limiting factors. And that's the ones I was talking about earlier. Like if you don't have the right amount of water, you can have too much, you can have too little. If you don't have the right amount of pore space in your soil, the roots are not going to be able to breathe. And fertilization will not enhance desired growth if the nutrients applied are not deficient. The plants can only eat so much, and anything in excess of that, either the bacterias and the other soil organisms, the funguses, are going to eat it up, or it's going to wash away. Once the bacteria break it down, it becomes water soluble and it will wash away. So you want to have just enough for the plants you're planting in. Now, try to identify your limiting factors in your soil. And once you do that, work on them first. Before you put down any fertilizer, work on them. And you start by taking a soil sample and send it in for a soil test. And you have a brochure on the table, I think, that is on soil testing. Did we get that one out? Okay. Yeah, that tells you exactly how to do it. I found out that one of the laboratories they have listed in there, A&L Laboratories, has changed hands. It's now called Waypoint Analytics. I've used A&L in the past. It's the one that Frank Goen, who's the Bay Gardener, writes in the Bay Weekly every week. He used A&L Laboratories. I was not happy with the last report I got back from them. Not happy at all. So I did another soil test and sent it over to the University of Delaware. And I got back a more reasonable readings based on what I could see in the soil. So just be careful, not all soil labs are the same. Now, we need to know what's in the soil before we add any chemicals or fertilizer or lime or any other soil amendments. You got to have a starting point, because and you got to get it tested. There's no other way to determine what the chemical content is. I usually scrape off the top edge of soil and use a bulb planter, push it down in the ground, and that gives me a plug of soil from 1 inch down to 7 inches down. And I do 10 of those around the area that I want to test, and then throw them in a bucket and mix them up real good, let them dry out, take all the roots, the stones, the bits of logs and everything else out of it, bag it and send it in. And remember that a soil test only for chemicals and bulk organic matter. It will not indicate the health of your soil. And I started working out at the ACLT, the Double Oak Farm out there last year. And the first thing I asked was, well, how do we find out what's living in this soil? And at that time, there was a soil scientist working there, volunteering, and he said, well, that gets expensive. And I said, oh, really? And he said, oh, yeah, if you want to know what, the biological activity in your soil, you're going to pay a couple of $300 for the basic test. I said, well, we don't have that in the budget, and you can kind of see there's nothing living in this soil anyway, so there's no need to send it in right now. But those tests get really expensive, and I don't know of any standard for biological activity in the soil. I know the more you have, the better off you are, but you can't really test for it. That's where the feel, the smell, get in a handful of your soil and see what's in there. Look at it. Yes.
So if you had compost, does that compensate or make sure that you have the right portion of
The question was, if you add compost, doesn't it make sure that you have the right activity in it? Well, up to a point it does, and I'll go into that in a little bit, but yes, the more organic matter you put in it, usually the better off you are. Yes, sir.
I think I heard you mention one standard in the past concerning earthworms. I think 22 earthworms per square cubic foot.
Cubic foot, 22 earthworms. They say that's real fertile soil. That's something you can see when you take your spade. The question was the standard for healthy soil being determined by earthworms, and it's about 22. I've read this more than one place, but they say if you have 22 earthworms in the cubic foot of soil, then you have pretty healthy soil. That's a lot of earthworms. I haven't seen soil with that many in it outside of a compost pile in a long time, but something to shoot for. Here's a couple of limiting factors, and this is what healthy soil, the components of healthy soil should be. And we really need to make the soil healthy before we apply any fertilizers, because if you apply them, the soil's not healthy, they can build up in there, or those that don't wash away. You can even make your soil toxic by adding especially synthetic bag fertilizers. Here's a composition of a chart of ideal soil, and I'd like to discuss two components of the soil shown in this slide. And they are in red. It's the air part and the organic matter. And you're thinking, well, soil, I had no idea it was 25% air. Well, healthy soil is going to be that high in pore space, they call it. And plants breathe underground. They do not breathe through their leaves. Like they're alive right now out there, even though there's no leaves on them. They're doing all their metabolism underground. And they don't breathe carbon dioxide, they breathe oxygen. And to get this oxygen, the only place they're going to get it is underground. So that's why you need the pore space. And the air, they also expire carbon dioxide. Their cells are just like ours, except they have a harder shell on the outside of them. But for their metabolism, they've got to have oxygen input. They have to be able to breathe out carbon dioxide. So that's why you want 25% air. Well, you know, how does it keep from going stagnant? How can it, you know, how does the air get there? Well, every time it rains, the water flows through and it pulls the air down behind it. It washes away the bad. The air from the top comes right down in behind it, fills those pore spaces. So then take a chunk of it, and if you can cut a block of it, you weigh it, and then compress it, and then weigh it again. Well, it's going to weigh the same, but the volume is going to change. Yeah. You know, that's a hard one to do. That's not easy. Yes, ma'am.
Like digging it or two, you can't get a spade in it, you know it's compacted, and there's not much air down in there. We have a lot of that in California County.
We have a tremendous amount in California. The question was, you know, how do you find out if you can't get a spade into it? Well, that's kind of a good indicator, and it goes back to, like I said, you get your spade in it if you can, and pull a chunk of it up and start looking at it. But if you can't get your spade in it, you really have a problem. And you'll find that in every walkway, every driveway, that is compacted to the maximum. And every time you drive over it with your lawn tractor to mow it, you're going to be compacting it. If you walk on it while it's wet, it's really bad on it, on and on and on and on. But this is what we want to shoot for. And once you get it right, try not to get on it anymore, especially in your garden. Well, I'll go into that in a minute. Anyway, that's why we want the air. And of course, the water we want in there because it holds the nutrients. Every particle of soil is going to be covered with a little water. Once the, what they call the field water runs out of it, every particle is going to be covered. Well, that's where the nutrients hang out. And the plant roots touch the particle of soil, and they can pull these nutrients out of the water. So you want to keep about 25% water in your soil. And let's see, organic material. Now, Frank Goen, in one of his articles last summer, said that to garden organically, you need about between 5 and 10% organic matter in the soil. That is really hard to get, really hard. I put about 50 tons of manure in my garden at home, and it's a little plot about 50 feet wide and 100 feet long, and I just barely have 5% after putting organic matter into it for 14 years. So it's really hard to get it up there. But that's what we ought to shoot for. So you want this organic matter in there. You'd like to have as much organic matter in there as the soil will hold, because the soil food web, and that's all the biota, the little bitty critters that walk around, the earthworms, the microbes, the bacteria, the funguses that live in it, love this stuff. And the more activity you can get, the better off you are. Now, back to the question about not being able to get your shovel into it. Frank Goen says that if you have less than 5% air in your soil or less than 5% porosity, roots will not even grow it. They won't even, they'll just come up to it and stop, and go somewhere else. So when you get it compacted, that's one of the worst things you can do to it. Yes. Okay. Amazing. Nematodes are little tiny worms. So they're fairly complex, and 100,000 in a cup. And these all interact with each other. And you have the mycelia, you've got, I don't know, protozoa. I'm not sure what protozoa are.
It's single cell animals that like paramecium.
Oh, okay. Single cell animals, thank you. And arthropods are the bigger, more complex animals that can have feet and stuff. And these things are really tiny. They are just so tiny. So how can we keep these things healthy and happy? Give them organic material. And leaves, grass clippings, kitchen waste, garden residue, compost, shredded paper, whatever you've got that's organic, throw it out there. And they will start living in it. The bigger ones will tear it down on top. The little ones will start working on it. As you go down through the soil horizons, they will gradually infiltrate the entire top level with organic matter. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard that you should put citric pills and citric into the compost because the fragrance goes there.
Okay. Lucy said that she has heard that you don't put the fruit peels and fruit in it because it's citrus with the citric acids in it, because the earthworm, it burns their lips, the earthworms. When you, and that, I've heard that too. Yeah, I've heard that. I throw my grapefruit rinds, I throw my lemon rinds in there. They just avoid it. And I've got more earthworms in my compost than you know, they're selective eaters. I don't know who came up with that, but I've got plenty of earthworms and I throw all of that stuff in there.
So
Yes, ma'am.
what does the citrus peel add then, if you're doing that, even though the earthworms don't like it?
Adds a lot of organic matter and a lot of fiber. You get a lot of the cellulose and all of those things, those break down slow, so you get the fat and stuff. It's got a lot of sugar in it. It's got a lot of nitrogen in it. I mean, they make explosives out of orange peels. They did back in World War II. It was really neat. If you take an orange peel, just a little section of it, and twist it next to a candle, it flares up like that because of the nitrous oils that it gives off. It's got a lot of nitrogen in it. Okay, yeah. Depending on if you want to grow earthworms, I would definitely agree with you. But otherwise, they're going to move away from it. And I haven't had a problem with it. On compost, the list that I read, I did not include animal stuff, fats, all of that. People on farms compost it all. They'll drag a horse carcass down there and throw it in the compost heap, cover it up with manure. And it all breaks down eventually. It's just slow. It's going to attract some stuff that you don't like. It's going to be full of flies. It's going to have the possums, the raccoons, the dogs, the cats up there in it, throwing it all over your yard. That's the main reason people avoid composting animals. But it's still organic matter. It still breaks down. It takes a lot longer to do. I don't throw animal waste in my compost, but you can if you want. Anything that's organic is going to break down eventually, and it's going to add things to your compost and eventually your soil. And once we get our organic matter up and we establish a healthy food web, then we're on our way to healthy, fertile soil. What benefits do we get from compost? Organic matter makes healthy soil by feeding the soil food web. And there's a couple of things on here I'd like to explain. One is cation exchange capacity, or it'll be CEC on your soil test when you get it back. You would like to have a real high number in that block on your soil test. You would like to have a high cation exchange capacity in your soil, because that is an indication of how many nutrients it will hold. Sand is below 5 on the scale. And if you have a real sandy soil, you throw fertilizer down on it, it's gonna, a few pieces of this fertilizer are gonna accumulate on the piece of sand. The rest of it's gonna flow right through into the groundwater. So if you put the fertilizer down, you're kind of just throwing it into the groundwater when you're doing it, if your CEC is really low. Now, compost has a CEC of between 100 and 300. So if you add good quality compost to your flower beds, your lawns, your soil, then you're going to raise that CEC significantly. And it's still hard to get the number way up, but you're going to do better than 5. And 5 is probably minimum. But and it'd be hard to grow stuff with a CEC of 5. Now, you reduce the need for bagged fertilizer. Compost contains, good quality compost contains all the necessary ingredients for plant growth. It used to be a plant. So anyway, compost. There, you have a handout on how to make compost there. So now, I've always read, yes.
Compost is good for a clay soil, but it's good for a sandy soil.
Of course. Yeah. No, it'll loosen it up until the compost goes away, and then, you know, until the bugs eat all of it. You got to keep adding it. Yes, ma'am. That doesn't have any organic matter left in it. When you burn it, it breaks it down to the basic chemical molecules. And potash, that's what you get when you burn this stuff. The organic matter goes away with the carbon and everything else that you burn out of it, and you're left with bagged fertilizer pretty much. But ashes are, you know, you use your ashes too. They make great fertilizer. Yes, ma'am, certainly. Did you have a question, Jim?
No, I was just thinking, another thing I've done is gone with a shovel down as much as 2 feet. I have clay about 6 inches down. Then if I break through the clay, and if you don't do it, know it, until you dig deep enough, then there's good soil down under there. So if you have a clay substrate, and then you have to know how deep that clay horizon is, and if you break through it, then you can go through it. If you don't do that, you can't.
Yeah, that is, you're going to have water standing on top of that clay. Jim mentioned that in his property, he digs down a little way and he hits a layer of clay. And in that's called a plow pan. It can be the same thing. It can be there naturally. You create it when you over-till and over-plow. But you got to break through that. And he said that his soil beneath that is good. So there's a term called double digging, where you go down to shovel depth, you lift that soil out, you mix compost below it, which would be your clay layer, and then put your topsoil back down on it. And it's called double digging. Works out real well. It's labor intensive though. Yes, ma'am. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I want to know where manure fits into this whole compost picture. And I would also like to ask, I kind of stay away from it from my vegetable garden. Am I just too uptight about that? Because I just don't want it on my vegetables.
Good question. and it's really a question that's debated all the time. And there are rules and regulations for farmers on use of. The question was manure. How does that fit into the picture? Can you compost it? Does it present a, any sort of hazard or anything? And yes, no, if I got them in the right order. But anyway, I use composted horse manure. Because number one, it's got the right carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's 30-to-1. So you put it in a pile and you let it sit while it heats up. After it finishes heating up, you throw a few earthworms in it and they take care of it. Now, the pathogens that you worry about and that are really of concern, and you hear about the salmonellas, you hear about the E. coli's and botulisms and everything else. Those are, except for some of the E. coli's, the bad E. coli's do not survive indefinitely outside of a mammal body. Neither will the salmonellas. So everybody says, well, if you leave it set out in the open for 90 days, all of those things are gone.
Is it okay if it's dry?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, it's still organic matter.
No, I mean about the salmonella. Does that help? Does it like?
It goes away. It won't live. It's too not the right temperature, not the right moisture, not the right conditions for these things. They just don't live outside the body for an indefinite period of time. And when you compost it, if you do it right, you will have turned it, according to MDA, you need to turn it five times, and it's got to heat up to at least 100, I believe it's 135 degrees, at which you need a thermometer to check. And the temperature kills off 99% of your pathogens. And if you run earthworms through it afterwards, they take care of everything else. I mean, they are really good. So yeah, no, but there are some problems with manure, and I'll go into those in a moment. Let's see. I used to say that compost. I used to give composting lectures here, and I always told everybody. I said compost is not a fertilizer; it's a soil amendment. Well, I lied, and I've been known to do that. I'm finding out different. I learned something all the time. Compost we use in our garden is 20-year-old horse manure, and it has 6 times the phosphorus and 9 times the potassium as fertile topsoil. So those numbers are up. I applied out here at the Double Oak Farm, I applied 220 cubic yards of this 20-year-old horse manure, trying to get some humus back into the soil. Well, now I've run right up to the center of the excessive range on my soil sample for potassium and phosphorus. So you have to be careful how much you use, where you get it from, where it came from. The horse manure that I got was stable cleanings. Originally it had the sawdust, the animal bedding, and straw in it. Well, it also had the animal urine in it, because they would stand there and they would fill it, saturate their animal bedding. So it was accumulating this, and it sat out there for 20 years in a beautiful big pile, the blackest, greatest, smelled wonderful. It was just fabulous stuff, but it did have high nutrients in it. So now I've got to figure out a way to put organic matter in without adding any more potassium and any more phosphates. So you do have to be careful there, but it'll heat up real good. The earthworms love it, I'll tell you. There's nothing better for them. You keep some compost worms real happy with that stuff. Yes, ma'am.
Two questions. One, did you have your compost tested like you did your soil to find out the chemical content?
That's where I got the 9 times the phosphorus and what did I have there? Anyway, 6 times the phosphorus, 9 times the potassium. There is a test for compost. There's a test for manure. They are different. I wanted the compost test, but it cost $80, and my boss said, well, we'll just put it in the manure test, which costs $40. So, it makes difference on the results a little bit. But anyway, the overall indication is that this stuff is really high in nutrients also. So it makes good fertilizer. You just don't want to use as much of it as you would something like leaf grow or, commercial compost, because they make it out of leaves and stuff.
My second question was, earthworms, you don't have a lot. Can you buy earthworms somewhere, or are there better ones to use?
The question was, can you buy earthworms to use in your compost, or are there better worms? There is what is called a manure worm, and it's the little red worms. They love to live in condominiums. They work vertically. The night crawlers that you see out here, these gigantic worms that people use for fishing, they're solitary worms. They make a burrow in the soil. They live out in your lawn. They live out in your garden. They come up at night, they look around, and they grab something, take it back down and eat it. Yes, there is a difference. Yes, you can buy them. Yes, they're expensive. Give me a call. I've got more of these beautiful little red worms than I can handle. I can't keep them all fed. But, yes, ma'am.
Are they native?
Manure worms? I don't think any earthworms are native, are they? Didn't somebody say that they,
No, here we had earthworms, because of the low refugees. The order to six and also, but we did most of the earthworms here, but they were replaced by non-native earthworms, which actually are destroying some
the question was, are these earthworms native or non-native? Because some of the earthworms are destroying the understory of the forest. And what they do is they go in and they eat the leaf litter that all the plants and bushes for a natural understory live in. That's where the roots live in. So when all this leaf litter is gone by the earthworms and all that they deposit left is some really nice humus, you get a complete change of the entire ecosystem. And it's really causing a problem somewhere. The ones out in the forest are the nightcrawler type. And they're not the red worms. The red worms won't live out in the forest. They won't live out in your lawn. They'll only live in your compost heap. And I don't know where they come from, because I started compost without importing any worms, but they were there. Yes, sir.
So between these two comments, are we saying that the earthworms didn't all come from Europe?
Judy, the question was, did all these earthworms that we had come from Europe originally? And Judy says no, because we're below the great glacier level, that we already had some earthworms here before the Europeans showed up. Now, I don't know what brand earthworms the Europeans brought over, but I've always heard that also. But I do know that the night crawlers are not supposed to be in our forests, because they can really do some damage. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Back to testing the soil. I can ask you a simple question. If you're having to test it as you keep amending it, why wouldn't you buy one of these little kits? I mean, are those kind of good?
The question was, if you, after you have your soil test, do you need to keep testing it as you add the amendments? Or can you buy one of the kits you get down at the garden store and test it yourself? You can. It's not easy to test it yourself. The results are far more accurate if you send it in. But if you have poor soil and you need to fix it, then I would recommend that you get a test every year. You work on it all summer, put it to bed in the winter, and then next spring you test it again and see where you are before you start adding a bunch of stuff. The test, you can get them for as cheap as $7. The one at the University of Delaware gives you a nice report that gives you everything you need. It's $12. So, if you're spending this much time and effort, I would recommend that you go ahead and spend the $12 and get one every year.
You were talking about testing manure and testing and the
Oh,
compost and all that, so for a regular home garden, you wouldn't do all that.
I wouldn't. And if you build your compost heap up and you use a little bit of manure, you use all your leaf clippings, grass clippings, if you don't put down Scott's turf builder weed and feed on your lawn, you know, anything organic can go in there. Shred all your shredded paper and everything. Yes, ma'am.
If you're composting in a bin, you know, you grow up over there, grow something in there, you need to add earthworms to there, or you can just throw that out in the garden itself.
Oh, you can throw it out in the garden. You don't have to run earthworms through it. If they break it down into humus. They eat a lot of stuff that the soil biota actually needs. In fact, you know, some of the compost should go in without having the earthworms run through it, because when they get through with it, it's nothing but plant food.
Two things. One is a question. With my compost, what I do is I have a new building that's extremely so when I put it in, I keep the earth ones out, and put them back into the compost. I got a lot of those things. But the lady over there, you know, talking about the soil, I would also recommend that she use cover crop after, you know, in the fall. I would say cover crop.
Yeah. Okay. First question over here was, do you need to put earthworms in this compost before you put it out in your garden? The answer is no. In fact, you don't want it completely broken down before you put it in, because you've got to leave something for the other than earthworms to eat. And they eat the organic material that's left in your compost. And then Lucy added that cover crops. And I don't remember if I have a slide on that or not, but I'm going to talk about cover crops. So I'll try to remember. Was there any other question over here? Okay. So be careful with your compost. And as far as having your compost tested, it's not really necessary if you know what went into it and you build it properly. Now, a word of caution when dealing with composts, manures especially, or straw. The farmers go out and they put this picloram in it, or trichloram, and it is a potent, persistent herbicide. And they go down and spray their crops with it, and I guess it takes out the dicots and leaves the monocots or something like that. But it's going to destroy, if you get it into your garden, that some people have referred to it as killer compost. If you get it in your garden, it's going to take a couple of years for the microbes to break this stuff down and get rid of it. And nothing, you know, with a broad leaf is going to grow in there. Real horror stories, you read about them in Mother Earth News or Organic Gardening, and all of these people really having a problem with it. Now, I take the manure, once I find the source for it, this compost manure, and I put it in a pot and put 3 bean seeds in it. And I'll do the same with straw that I use for mulching. I'll soak the straw for a couple of weeks and then put 3 bean seeds and some sterile organic plant mix, and then water it with that. And if the beans come up and they grow okay, then I know the straw is okay, and I know the manure is okay. And I was using 20-year-old manure, so I suspected that it was okay because they didn't even start using this stuff until after it was composted. This picloram and all are so persistent, they'll go through the animal without breaking down. So you can get it in manures, you can get it in straw. Yes, sir.
You have to wait to see the leaves on the beans before you're finished.
Yes, sir, I do. I let them try to let them go till I get the second leaves on it. And you'll be able to tell if they'll be curled up if it's bad stuff. Say again?
Grass is a good seed product.
Bob said to try cress seed. I mentioned bean seed. He asked if you had to wait till the leaves came out. I said, yes, you do. And then he said, well, he's heard that cress seed is good for making that test. Thank you.
I use straw as a mulch. Whenever, wonder if it's effective. What could I use as a substitute?
Lucy said she uses straw for a mulch. You can either test it, like I described, or use chopped leaves. Leaves are pretty safe. I mean, they're really good. They are easy to create leaf molds on them. They're a great habitat for everything. And that's what we've gone to using out at the Double Oak Farm is leaves. But you have to find a good source. So, yes, ma'am.
Speaking of good sources, where would you recommend finding like hay bales? I mean, like Amish farmers, or is there any way you can predict ahead of time so you can have decent straw?
The question was, is there any way to predict ahead of time if you have decent straw? I don't know. You got to know the farmer before you get it. And don't think that the Amish don't use chemicals. Don't ever get the idea that they're organic. Yes, ma'am.
I read something about using lawn clippings. So last year, my husband wanted a lawn sweeper, so I thought I was doing myself a favor by having him to sweep up all the stuff, and I could put it in my garden and keep down all the weeds and my spit supposedly. And I don't know if I didn't put enough on or if it caused it, but I had a lot of grass in my garden last year. So is that a good idea? Did I not put on thick enough? Or do you end up with a lot of grass in your
The
garden?
question was, she uses lawn clippings for mulch, and then she had a lot of grass grow up. Well, had it gone to seed?
Not usually. It's usually pretty
Yeah.
good.
I don't know. But if you put a good thick layer on it, when the grass comes up, just put some more on it. I mean, once it comes up and you put some more on, it's going to kill it usually. But be careful, because number one, if you take your grass clippings out, that means you're robbing your lawn of nutrients. Whatever you take out, you got to put back in somehow, or the soil keeps going down and down. The fertility keeps going down and down and down. That's why we recommend a mulching mower that grinds it up and you let it set. And people say, well, it makes these nasty rows, and it looks bad and everything. But that stuff dries up and, it goes right back in. So, but anytime you take something out, you're robbing it. I see people downtown and they rake all their leaves out to the street, or somebody with a vacuum comes along and picks them up. And I'm thinking, how long can you keep doing that before your yard and trees and everything are dead? You just keep taking without putting anything back. So, mulching more if you can. Sorry to get on that. But yes. Yes. I don't know, because I haven't used hay. But I do know that some of the hays that they bale, like alfalfa, are the broadleaf type. So, and then everybody complains about the seeds in it, growing stuff. I'm thinking, alfalfa, first of all, alfalfa puts its roots down. It makes a root structure you wouldn't believe. It can go down over 100 feet with their roots. And anyway.
I think the answer is yes, it could be affected. Maybe the seeds are fertilized and show up their enforcement.
Yeah.
I just like to stress.
Let me repeat that. Okay, Bob said that it probably shows up in hay because it shows up in horse manure. Hadn't thought of that. Haven't worked that rationale. Yes.
I'd like to stress, I look at fall as my harvest time for leaves. I catch every leaf in my yard, and I put it in piles in something. And if I have a pile that's this high, and I put it in, I have one rain, and it's already 20% protected. And you can just keep feeding it to do that. I catch every leaf, and I'll go in 4 leaves for my leaf. So it's the magic cheap fruit.
That's the best solution for leaves.
I also take all the leaves, I'll put it in the trash can, and I use my weed eater, and I pulverize it, just all the goat, or the string thing, and then some are hard to do, then I just take the 12 fragments, I lay down 2 or 3, something like that.
Okay, one more question, then,
No, another question.
okay.
Leaves are nature's mulch and nature's fertilizer.
Okay, Judy says,
So really big without any help.
yeah. Jim says that he takes all of his leaves and his neighbor's leaves, which I prefer taking somebody else's leaves and leaving mine under the tree. But then he throws them in his compost heap and takes a weed whip and just sticks it down in there and it shreds them really good. And then Judy said that leaves are nature's mulch and nature's fertilizer. And it's all part of the natural system in the carbon cycle. Okay, if we could move on and kind of hold any more questions until we get on down here. All right, fix the pH of your soil. And the reason for fixing the pH is because if it's too low, then, well, let me explain pH really fast. pH is an acronym for potential hydrogen and indicates the soil's acidity or alkalinity in a scale from 0 to 14, with 7 being neutral. And our goal is to keep the soil's pH between 6 and 7, meaning just slightly acidic. Now, why does the pH matter? Let's take phosphorus, for example. As you can see right here, if you get below 6, the plants cannot rip that phosphate molecule loose from the soil particle. It's a chemical thing, and when your pH, your acidity gets real low, the plants just can't seem, their roots can't seem to pull that thing loose from the soil particle. If you use lime, if you need to raise the pH, but you have to be careful. Like out at our farm, our pH was 5.9 when I showed up, and also our magnesium levels were excessive, beyond excessive. And I know it's because the farmers in the past who have been farming that for centuries, probably in tobacco, had gone out every year and put down lime because that's what everybody did. And they used dolomite lime because it was cheap. And it's just ground up marble or rock, and it has very high magnesium levels. So my magnesium level is way out of balance. So there's other forms of lime. You can get bone meal, which still has magnesium in it. Calcite lime is what we use, which has a very low magnesium level in it. And you can use gypsum, but that adds your calcium, but it apparently does not change the pH that much. So you have to look and see where your calcium level is before you apply some of this stuff. All the nutrients need to be in balance. And that's why you get the soil test. That's why you got to look at it. Ask somebody else to look at it. You can go down here to the extension office. They have a nutrient management person in there who can tell you if you get there early enough in the day before he moves on up north. And he can tell you what you need to do to get your pH up. It's not easy a lot of times. Sulfur lowers the pH, but it depends on a soil bacteria called Thiobacillus. To oxidize the sulfur and release dilute sulfuric acid, which acidifies the soil. I don't think anybody around here is going to have a problem with that. I believe if you just leave things alone, your soil will be more acid than you want. But anyway, it takes weeks to months for either of these methods to take effect. They only let farmers lime once every 3 years now. And it's controlled. You can't raise the pH more than half a point per year, or you really, really tear up the chemistry of the soil if you try to do more than that. So you got to be careful. But anyway, the closer that you can get up here to the, say, 6.5, the better off you are. That's where all of these new plants can best utilize all of these nutrients. Okay, feed your soil and let your soil take care of your plants. Everybody thinks, well, I gotta put fertilizer on my plants. Gotta feed my plants. You don't have to feed your plants. If you feed your soil's going to take care of the plants. And if you don't consider this stuff that's underground, then you're making a big mistake. And you got to think what's going on down below the surface, the stuff that I can't see. What is going on down there? So try to feed, get your soil right, and then you can use your fertilizer, and you'll know how much you have to put down. You'll know what you need to put down and how to apply it. Okay, we don't have much longer to go here. Plants live underground, and you want to make this habitat for them as simple, as comfortable as possible. Now we need to feed this entire system. And I don't know where they get these pictures. You pull them off the internet, but that's a three-dimensional root system that's probably laid down for photo op, and because you're not going to cut the soil and see that. That's a plant that they washed the roots and then laid it down there and made it look like it. But anyway, it's got the plant's root system, and it's got the what do you call it? The fungus. Mycorrhizal fungi, yes. And anyway, probably about half of the stuff you see in there is fungus. It goes in and it can either attach to the outside of the root, or they can worm their way into the root cells, and they transfer nutrients back and forth. The plant gives it its sugars, and the mycorrhizal fungi gives it the nutrients in a form that they can use. Yeah, I've got it written down here, mycorrhizal fungi. Okay, now something we want to understand here is that plants eat simple molecules. They can't eat sugar and carbohydrate. They make sugar and carbohydrate out of simple molecules. So they have to have it in a very basic form. And they use the phosphates and the phosphites and the ammonia and the ammonium, and also a compound, which is the potash. And these are the things that hang out in the layer of water around the soil particle. And they're I won't say subatomic. You can't see these things. You can't see them with a microscope either. But that's what plants eat. And there's a couple of ways that they can get these. One is from organic matter. After the microbes and the funguses break it down, they break it down into these simple molecules, and then the plants can pick it up and absorb it through their roots. So if you have organic matter and you have it healthy with all of the living things in it, it feeds the plant. The other way you can do it is to get some organic fertilizer. And I had to black out the brand name so that you don't know what it is. But anyway, That one's a pretty good one. That's what we use to get our nitrogen in for fertilizer out of the farm. We don't use much of it. We rely more on organic matter. But this is good for a nitrogen source, and it's still, it has water insoluble nitrogen in it. And the water insoluble is the stuff that still has to be acted on by microbes to break it down into a simple enough particle that the plant root can pick it up. So that's the water insoluble is saying the same thing as time release, but it won't ever get released if you don't have the microbes in the soil. The water soluble nitrogen is the stuff that the plants can use immediately. So you get immediate gratification and you get long-term gratification from this one product. For the bagged synthetic fertilizers, all you get is immediate gratification, and that's it, nothing long-term. But we'll go into that in a moment also. Now, the bagged fertilizers use polymers. They coat the particles in polymers, and it dissolves real slow, and that's what they call time release for the synthetic fertilizers. Now, this is back to the mycorrhizal fungi and microbes. This stuff is, I'm going to pass it around so that you can see all of the stuff that's in there. And if you get a bag of it that's been taken care of properly, this entire list right here is microbes, it's funguses, it's other stuff. As long as it hadn't sat out in the sun too long, they'll probably be viable. I use this stuff not as a fertilizer, but just to sprinkle it on top of the planting beds and water it in, more for the biological activity that it's going to kickstart in my old compost than for the fertilizer qualities. So that goes in right with the organic matter, and just a sprinkling of it. I put this in because I'll tell you what, you talk about Photoshop, that's the same plant, and they just Photoshopped another plant on top of it. But I wonder, that grew up pretty quick, didn't it? So you got to watch out what you see out there. And I think it's giantvegiegardener.com. I don't remember if it was a commercial entity or you know, if they were trying to sell something, but I'm not buying it. Okay, now minimize the disturbance. Once you get your soil looking pretty good, minimize the disturbance on it, because when you go in and till it, when you plow it, when you spade it, when you turn it over, all you're doing is destroying all the work that you put into it. I like to use, if you've ever dug a hole or a trench in the backyard, and then you put the dirt back in it when you're finished, and it's all mounded up and everything, and then after the first time it rains, it's lower than the rest of the ground around it. It's because it compacted. It's because you disturbed it, you tore up the soil structure, you interrupted all the biological activity, you turned it upside down, and it's going to take a long time before you can get it back to its original health. So to minimize the disturbance, we practice no tilling out in the place where I work. Yes, ma'am.
How do you get air to it?
Let the organisms do it. You put the compost in it. We use a broad fork to work the compost in, and it's a garden fork, and we kick just open the soil up a little bit, kick the organic matter down in there, and let it close back up. And once we do that, we're not going to do it again. We're going to keep adding a little bit of compost and a lot of mulches on top. And then the soil microbes and everything that lives in the soil are going to move that stuff up and down through the soil horizons. And roots, we're putting roots in the ground, cover crops. Who mentioned cover crops? Yeah. Lucy had mentioned cover crops. It's the best way to keep roots in the ground, because once you get your soil right, you got to keep it active. And some of these things have to live in this, right around the roots, in the root zone. Because the plants put out exudes that actually attract these little microbes that are beneficial to them. And you want to keep roots in the ground as much as possible and keep the soil covered. Yes, Lucy?
That's cover crops. I mean, that's where I'm, don't you want to till those cover crops in the soil?
Okay, Lucy asked, with cover crops, don't you want to till them back into the soil? No. I want to cut the root crown off the cover crops. Right now, we're doing daikon radish and winter wheat in our planting beds that didn't have something already in them. And I do not want to, because right back here, now this is not actual, because these roots, these things would be right up to the ground level almost on that drawing. It's probably more realistic to go back here and look at that thing. Well, they did the same thing, because the roots are going to be right up toward the surface. Now, you just cut the thing off there. It's not going to grow back up. Yeah, half an inch down. There's no reason to cultivate more than half an inch down on any of this in your garden. Oh, I use a hula hoe. Hula hoe. It's just any hoe that you scrape along the top of the ground and knock it down. I'm going to create a lawnmower blade that drops down so that I can run down the road with this lawnmower and go about a quarter to half an inch below the soil surface. And it's a mulching mower, so it's going to mulch everything. But I haven't tried it yet. I'm going to try it. Anyway, back to, I don't remember if I repeated the question. It was, do you need to till these things under? No, you don't. And then you leave the other stuff on top as mulch. And again, if you have the soil healthy, all the critters are going to come up and get it. Plus, you're leaving the top mulched so the soil's covered. You got to keep the soil covered. No, well, depending on what you have. On winter wheat, they won't, because if you go down, and this thing should be lifted up to where these are right on the surface almost, but you hit the root crown, and most things will not regenerate from these roots. Once you cut the root crown, that's it. And you leave it on top. Don't know about hairy vetch. Haven't looked into that. I know it's going to work on winter wheat. Yeah, rye. I'm sure it'll work on rye. No, I haven't researched the other ones. But if you till this stuff in, if you till it in deep enough, then you're going to go anaerobic with it, and it won't. It'll sit down there and sour. There's a stratum of biological activity near the surface, probably 6 inches down, and those are aerobic. They use oxygen, and then the ones below them are considered anaerobic. And you don't want to mix that up. You don't want to turn them upside down, because they're already set. Leave them. They're going to be there. As long as you keep roots in the ground, as long as you keep the soil covered, you're going to be good. Okay, we went through this. We're about through. All right. Again, I had to cover that up so you don't know what it is. Yeah. A lot of farmers are going to no-till. You're going to see the stubble, the corn stubble out in the fields, because they're leaving the roots in the ground. You prevent erosion, you keep the soil happy, and they go in with some sort of seed drill. I haven't actually seen the machine, but they just plant right on top of it.
So you don't till when you're fixing this.
I didn't when we were fixing it.
At place wood.
Yeah.
So
Oh, you got a
have
problem.
to till. You have to do something. You can't no till.
Yeah.
You don't just keep
Okay.
adding stuff on top, right?
You can.
I could do that instead of.
Yeah,
tilling.
instead of tilling. question was, the lady has clay soil and she needs to fix it. You can lasagna garden, but you're still going to have a clay problem because the water is not going to drain through it properly. So you got to do something with that. And I go back to the broad fork, because I can go down 9 inches with this broad fork and break up the soil, and they make a fork with tines on it that are up to 19 inches long, where you can really get down there and break this stuff up. And once you break it up, and you get a little bit of organic matter in there, then it's going to drain. And that's the way we're working our planting beds out at the farm, which has a plow pan and a tiller pan from being over-tilled for centuries. But that way you do not turn the soil over. You leave the microbes where they're supposed to be. But everything's different. If it was really bad with the big layer, they get in some heavy machinery to start and use what they call a chisel plow. And it has a narrow shaft and then a blade on the bottom, and they get that thing in the ground, and again, they don't turn the soil over. They just run along there and bust up that clay layer, bust it up real good. Okay, we're getting close. Okay, chemical fertilizer. Now this is your standard 10-10-10 out here, and more recently it'll probably be 10-0-10 because they're taking the phosphate out of it. I don't know what you can buy out there now. I don't buy any of this stuff, so I'm not up to date on it. But when you use this synthetic fertilizer, you begin a downward spiral toward unsustainability. You do a lot of things wrong with putting this stuff down. One, it's overly concentrated, and it gives the soil an environment that is not conducive to biological activity. And remember that fertility, and this is from Garden Notes again, the Colorado State, is only part of the soil's role in supporting plant growth. The organic content of the soil also directly affects plant growth due to its influence on soil tilth and the activity of beneficial soil microorganisms. Relying solely on manufactured fertilizers is not recommended, as this does not support good soil tilth or health. And before we have a summary, do we have any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Take part of our lawn area, we've been living here for 27 years in the same area, and it's always been long for about 4 acres of property. I'm trying to take some of those areas and turn them into planting beds with mix of vegetables and flowers. Because of the soil, is it best for me to actually cut that turf off of there and then just add the compost matter? Or should I, you said don't plant things in it, so I should try to plant grass into the soil. What's the best way to make those beds so that I can protect the soil?
Okay, the question was, she has lawn and she wants to make some planting beds in it. What's the best way to do that? Without having seen it, I would say the lasagna gardening. It's put down cardboard or heavy layer of newspaper on the turf, and then start building it up. Compost, leaves, wood ashes. Some people put wood ashes in it, back to manure. Just start layering it up, and any organic matter. You don't need to. You don't need to. So just stack it up on top. The Home and Garden Information Center on the University of Maryland, John Tronfeld has a real good YouTube video on lasagna gardening, how to go out and plant right on top of your turf. And you end up with a little, pretty much a raised bed, or you can go to raised beds.
Because I have to do something that my husband will look out and say, that looks good, it doesn't look like you're making a trash pile out there.
Yeah, cover it up with topsoil when you, and
So
never,
basically, I'm on top of the turf.
yeah,
Build on top.
that's the easiest way, I think. And again, watch the YouTubes on it. If you go to excavating and doing all that stuff, that's a lot of work. It's, I would consider that totally unnecessary. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Archie, what do you think of using gypsum to soften soil?
Judy asked, what do you think of using gypsum for the soil to loosen it up? Gypsum is calcium. Raising your calcium is a good idea pretty much everywhere. It also, you have to be careful because it does have sulfur in it. It does have a little bit of magnesium in it, I believe. But, as long as you're not having a problem with those, gypsum, even though it's high calcium, from everything I've read, it does not affect the soil pH that much. So it's good. We're going to use it out of the farm to add the calcium. Now, Jim and I were talking right before about the calcium-magnesium ratio. And if you have too much magnesium in your soil, it can bind it up and make it tight. If you have plenty of calcium to offset the magnesium, then it loosens it up, and it does it chemically. So yes, if you're low on calcium, it's a good idea to use gypsum.
Well, Dr. Jordan says that we have acidic soil in and the acidic soils are lacking in calcium.
Yes, Judy said that Frank Goen says that Calvert County soils are lacking in calcium. Yes, they are. We were low out at the farm, and we had great big bags of gypsum. I worried about the sulfur in the gypsum lowering the pH, but apparently that doesn't happen. It doesn't affect the pH that much when you add the calcium. I don't know if it's the calcium offsets the sulfur, but anyway, that's a good point. We're going to try it out there to try to get rid of our brick-like soil. Yes, sir.
Question about pH again. I think I've heard that it's been a myth about pine needles falling. We got a lot of pines that are blocking the ranch house. I tried to get it up, and I thought that it's making my soil acidic and not good for my lawn. Any word on that? Whether decaying pine needles are going to acidify your soil?
Question was, how about pine needles? The gentleman has a load of pine trees, a lot of pine needles. Does that make the soil more acidic? Apparently, from everything I've read, if you compost them properly, it does not cause any acidic, any acid at all in the soil, or does not lower the pH at all. I don't know. It may be that, yeah. Yeah.
It changes in other stuff. There's certain plants that won't grow there, but they're
Oh, yeah.
the things that like acid, then they're there. So they're
Yeah.
the plants will tell you.
Yeah. Jim says the plants will tell you. Under a pine tree, you're going to have trouble finding stuff that grows. Certain plants do well, others don't. And the ones that like acid live under the pine trees. The ones that don't like acid are going to live somewhere else.
I need to try to get timing out of my lawn. Because, I can mulch my weeds with the mower. I can suck them up with my lawn. But the timing was just that work to get them out. It's just,
The question was, should we get rid of the pine needle? I don't have a problem with pine needles. Of course, I'm not looking for a real lush lawn either. In fact, I don't do anything to my lawn. Mow it about twice a year. It depends on, it depends on what you like. But I have read that once you compost the pine needles, that they kind of become back towards neutral somehow. I don't know if it's the resins in them. I suspect that has a lot to do with it. I'm not, I never worried about it, so. Yes, ma'am.
I use pine needles for my road, in other words, so that the weeds don't come on. You know, it's more of a blocker.
Yeah.
And they do break down eventually, but that's what I do. So you want less grass, you have to do it.
Okay.
Don't mind.
Yeah, Mimi says, take your pine needles, move them from where you want grass and put them where you don't want grass, like in walkways. Lucy?
I have a question about my garden, every year, they have a gigantic, ocean bed or something, because every year I go out, it comes up oysters, and that they are.
Yes.
And is that a good, sometimes I use them as a mulch. I don't know if that's a good idea or not, but,
Lucy, it says, what about oyster shells? Somebody threw all their oyster shells out in their backyard before they moved in there, so they're popping up all the time. I don't know how much effect they're gonna have if they're not ground up. I don't, anytime you get it out of balance, you can. I mean, when you get things, it goes back to the percent of saturation of the cation exchange capacity, and it gets really involved, but your soil test is going to indicate, if you get it from the right place, is going to show you, and the University of Delaware shows on a chart whether you're excessive, whether you're high, medium, or low, and a real nice little chart, and it shows the major nutrients, including calcium, of where you are on that with your soil. So that's why you really need to get a soil test done before you start looking at these corrective measures. Yes, ma'am.
When you also finding on the soil, is that lower temperature that you really know what's effectively on, or because pine needles are cellulose, and they evaporate. It's not like getting pine bark chips along.
They have resins in them. They are heavy in resins, and that's what I suspect is where the acidity comes in. Well, I don't know. I like Mimi's. Yeah, the question was, the pine needles really make that much difference because they're just cellulose. They're just a leaf, but they do have resins in the little knob where they grow. They get real sticky. And I don't know. That's beyond me. I never worried about it that much. Mimi had a great idea. Put the pine needles where you don't want the grass to grow and rake them off where you do want the grass to grow. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
You talked about different types of weeds. If you have dogs and different seed pods, I know they need to reach a certain temperature to kill the seeds, right? So you can't use those for compost necessarily, but you wouldn't want to leave them on the soil.
Oh, the question is, there's
When did they come out?
some seeds like gumballs. You get the leaves, you get the gumballs, and you're going to end up with a whole bunch of gum trees in your garden or your flower beds if you use those. If you compost it and it gets hot enough, it's going to kill them. They say 135 degrees, I believe, is the key temperature. But you're not going to get that temperature from just leaves. You have to add a nitrogen source, which is where the manure comes in. Grass clippings can do it also. Any green kitchen waste will do it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a walkway that's right a couple feet from my garden, and sometimes or at least we used to, when there's grass growing up in between the bricks, we used to spray vinegar on it to get rid of them. How is that going to affect my garden being that close?
I wouldn't know, without knowing where it is. I know vinegar only kills the leaf. The only part you spray on it doesn't kill the plant.
Oh,
Of course, if you, let's see, grasses grow from the bottom up, most of them. They don't grow on the tip. That's why you mow your lawn and it doesn't kill it. So I don't know if you're really killing the grasses by doing that. If it, if it soaks down in there, it's gonna subject it to a severe amount of trauma and probably kill it. I don't know. They say vinegar's good for it, for killing weeds. I don't like to put anything anywhere near the garden that kills plants.
Okay.
It's just, I don't think it's a good idea. If you want to kill plants, you do it somewhere else. Yes.
I have two things. One, if you're gonna have your soil tested, now is the time to do it, because people do it in, March, April, and things get really clogged up. But I would also, just throw out, I had soil testing done by, University of Massachusetts, which is also another good one. The other thing is manure sources for, for horse food, spray stuff. There are no lots of horses in Delaware County. So, we can do a little sleuthing. I don't know how you find this out. I mean, I have the source insurance. I'm told to tell anybody. But there are lots of farms around where they have really nice aged manure and they love to get rid of it. So go to Walmart, get, plastic buckets, and, you should be able to get that stuff free.
Okay, Gay mentioned that you can get horse manure in this county real easy. A lot of times I've answered advertisements in, used to be in the Bay Week or the Penny Saver, but I don't know if the Penny Saver really does those ads anymore. They don't advertise like they used to. But pretty much any place you drive by that has horses, you can get manure from them. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna say, I have a friend who has horses, and she belongs to a riding club. So if you try to look up a riding club online, you might be able to get in touch with someone who will want to get rid of their horses.
I know who has a ton of it right off Emmanuel Church Road. It's Lucky Cricket Farms, but he's only there on weekends, and he's got a pile that, as big as this room. That's 8-10 feet tall, and 14 horses there, so there's plenty. Let me go into the review of this. Follow the fertilizer recommendations. You can't go wrong. We went through several factors of soil fertility, so you have to look at the holistic picture of soil when you're trying to fix it. You can't look at a soil test and then try to correct those numbers. You have to look at the entire system when you do it. Get a soil test. And Gay said, I forgot to mention it for those who may be out there streaming this thing. She said to get your soil test now because it gets so hectic in the springtime that you're going to get the results back too late to really accomplish anything with them. So this is a good time, and it's probably a good time for the labs that you send it into, because they won't be as busy right now. Now, nearly all soils can be improved by adding organic matter, bringing the life back to it. This can help sandy soils. This can help clay soils. Any problems you have, most of them can be fixed by adding organic matter. Even if you have a poisoned soil, which a problem I ran into with a persistent herbicide, once it gets in the soil, it breaks down by microbial activity. So, it takes a couple of years, but the microbes will gradually clean it up. They're really good about that. Living soil is a healthy soil. If your soil's good, your yard's going to look great. Your vegetables are going to be nutritious, and you eat the vegetables and you're going to be healthier. That's just a known fact. And use organic fertilizers and use as little as possible. And don't destroy your soil's tilth by tilling and using chemicals, please. I think that's all I have. Here's the references that I used, some of them. And thank you all for coming. And I think we have some giveaways here from our, and I think we have enough for everybody. This is a seed packet that we had at the Seed Saver